right. Hey, everyone. Again, welcome to today's webinar, How the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse Will Affect My Company Today. I am Luke Kibbe. I will be your moderator. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is interactive, so please use the chat box to submit your questions at any time. I'm going to be monitoring them, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar to go over the questions. I'm also going to mute all the phones as there's a lot of static with many people on the line. So again, if you have any questions, please use the chat box. And finally, you will receive the recording of this webinar after it is over, along with the slides, so keep an eye on your email. With that, let's get started. I'm excited to introduce industry expert Lukas Shaw at CleanFleet. Welcome, Lukas, and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Luke. Again, my name is Lukas Shaw, and I'm the account manager here for CleanFleet. I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to come in and learn a little bit about the drug and alcohol testing clearinghouse and how it's going to be affecting your business. So I'm going to start basically with reading the actual first paragraph of the regulation, just so we have some understanding about what effectively this is. And this is Section 1 of the Drug and Alcohol Testing Clearinghouse, Section A. The purpose of the clearinghouse, as mandated by Section 32402 of MAP-21, is to maintain records of all drug and alcohol program violations in a central repository and require that employers query the system to determine whether current and prospective employees have incurred a drug or alcohol violation that would prohibit them from performing safety-sensitive functions covered by the FMCSA or U.S. Department of Transportation drug and alcohol testing regulations. So a lot of legalese right there. So let's just break down what that means. Essentially, the clearinghouse is going to be a collection of positive and refused drug tests, including information related to the eligibility of safety functions for CDL drivers. It's going to be a tool for employers to ensure that they're hiring and employing drivers who are following the guidelines related to drug and alcohol use. So what exactly gets reported? So officially, there are 7 listings, and I've listed 8 here. Later on, you'll understand why I've differentiated 1 or 2 of them. But the first and most obvious one is a verified, positive, adulterated, or substituted controlled substance test. Basically, if you have an employee that goes in for a UA and they test positive, or they attempt to use a substance to alter the test, alter their urine, or they use a fake. Refusal to test, including failure to appear, a verified positive breath alcohol test above 0.04, a DUI citation in a commercial motor vehicle, a DUI conviction in a commercial motor vehicle, actual knowledge of illicit alcohol or drug use, a negative return to duty, and completion of follow-up. So 7 of those things are negative. The 8th one, completion of a follow-up, is important because it allows the employers to know that a driver has gone from being not able to perform safety functions to now being able to perform safety functions. The DOT is hoping to have this website built by January of 2020. Gives us about 3 years to begin getting compliant. There's some basic changes that need to occur. As an employer, you're going to need to begin changing the language of your pre-employment and background investigations to include the CDL number or an ID number. There is not a lot of clear clarity when it comes to how these are going to be searched. Going through the regulations, it's very clear that the FMCSA wants to go away from using social security numbers and focusing on CDL numbers. The concern, of course, is that people will have multiple CDL numbers and you won't be able to query properly. They seem to have a fair amount of confidence that when a driver transfers their CDL to another state, that information will carry with them. And in the Clearinghouse, if you search one CDL number, it will pull up all of them. Now, this is not 100% a for sure thing, which is why I would say that an ID number is not outside the realm of possibility. Going along with the pre-employment, you're also going to need a permission for an initial full query. Basically, I'll get into a little bit of that later. It's basically just going out there and seeing if there's information. Employers will be required to query the Clearinghouse and request drug and alcohol testing histories from previous employers going back 3 years until 2023. So right now, employers should already be attempting to contact previous employers and get drug and alcohol testing histories. But even when the drug and alcohol testing clearinghouse is active in 2020, it will not be enough to simply query the clearinghouse. You will need to continue to go through your process of contacting previous employers. And then once we get to 2023, that'll be no longer necessary. Employers will still need to request testing plans for drivers. Basically, it's if follow-up information, because that will not be available in the clearinghouse, and that can be acquired from the previous employer or the SAP. To give you an idea of how popular this is, the DOT reached out to basically 165 commenters for this rule, and there was overwhelming support, including support from a U.S. congressman and several trade associations and service agents. I mean, the biggest thing they focused on is improved safety and deterring job hopping, and improving access for employers to hire safe and qualified drivers. There were 10 commenters that expressed opposition. Majority of this opposition came from individual drivers, concerns about overlapping reporting responsibilities, and a lack of time for information to be reported. The cost expected, and this is from the final regulatory impact analysis, is a $196 million benefit, basically coming from the reduced number of drug and alcohol related crashes, with about $154 million cost. The largest of this portion is going to be incurred by drivers on follow-up programs and lost wages. And just to be clear, this estimate assumes that the 25% rate that we're currently testing now remains the same, because they're assuming now that they'll get about 10,000 positive results, but going up to 50%, there would be 28,000 positive results. So as long as the rate stays the same, you should be seeing a pretty good balance in terms of cost and benefit. So who has access? Employers and designated TPAs are going to be the primary users of this, and they're going to be needing it for limited queries and detailed queries, with permission from drivers. The estimated cost per query is about $2.50. Now, this is based on the clearinghouse that is working in Arkansas. That's how much they charge per query. But the FMCSA is confident that because of the volume of which this website is going to be used, and the increased number of people involved in it, that cost will actually go down. It's federal government, so you can't be 100% sure, but they are estimating that it will be lower than 250. Employers are not allowed to give blanket consent for permission, so you can't, when you're hiring an employee, have them sign a document that would say, "Hey, I always want to have access to querying your information." That is not going to be allowed under this. DOT drivers will also have access to their own records. There will not be a cost associated with that. And certain DOT officials with regulatory authority will also have access to the site. So there's two reasons that you need to use the database. The first is a pre-employment screen. So this will be a detailed query in order to make sure drivers that they're planning to hire do not have outstanding positive test results. Basically, this query will say whether or not this driver is eligible to perform safety functions. The annual screening is for employers to run every year on all of their drivers. Now, this query is limited, so it won't reveal specific information. Basically, what the limited query will say is if there is or is not information available on the employee that you are looking at. It'll basically say there is no new information, or you'll get a notification and say, "Hey, there is information on this employee." Now, the difference in terms of permission, for limited queries, you can get permission from an employee that you hire and have that on file. Currently, the expectation is that will either be digital or have a hard copy that will be uploaded to the website from employers. So either a signed affidavit that will be uploaded into the Clearinghouse, or an online permission that will be referred to the Clearinghouse as well. If a limited query does return any results, a detailed query is required. So how will this affect my business? Employers are going to need to register their authority with the Clearinghouse. Before making a hiring decision, it'll be critical that potential candidates, that you acquire their CDL numbers so that you can query the Clearinghouse. This will also require permission from them. Again, this gets to the point where it's important about changing your language in your pre-employment, acquiring the CDL number, and also acquiring permission to do a full query. This will most likely come in the form of electronic consent, where you, as the employer, contact the Clearinghouse saying that you want to get more information in regards to this employee. The Clearinghouse then will contact the employee, and the employee will give permission online. Every year, every driver you have employed must be queried to find new information, and you have to keep up-to-date records regarding actual knowledge, including DUI citations and convictions. For drivers, the most important thing is that you are going to need to allow for queries regarding your drug and alcohol testing. And you have to alert employers or prospective employers in writing of violations. What this specifically is targeting, and the reason that this rule was created, is that there was an incident where a driver who drove a school bus was involved in an accident that resulted in several casualties. And that driver was under the influence of an illicit substance. And said driver had attempted to get hired for other employers and failed pre-employment drug screens, but his current employer was not aware. So even if, as a driver, you are already working for a company, you're attempting to work for another company, you fail a pre-employment drug screen, you are going to need to tell your employer that you failed a pre-employment drug screen and that you will need to go through the process of return to duty. TPAs, MROs, SAPs must be registered with the Clearinghouse. TPAs have to report positive tests of owner-operators and refusals to the Clearinghouse. So the MRO will effectively be the one resulting in instances when there is not a where the DER and the driver are separate. MROs have to report verified positives, adulterated, substitute test results, and SAPs must report completion of return to duty processes. That will be their only contribution. They will simply say, yes, this person is eligible to take a return to duty drug test. So, specifically, when a limited query requires a detailed query, employers have to get permission from the driver. Again, that would be something that will be online. You will need to tell your employee, hey, we did an initial query and we found that there is information that we need to get from that. Can we have your permission? Most likely, again, that will be coming online. And a detailed query has to be done within 24 hours of the limited query coming back positive with results. For active employees, if it's not done within 24 hours, they have to be pulled from safety-sensitive functions until the query is completed. And they may resume duty once the driver has been cleared and the information has been collected by the employer. So, if the detailed query returns a positive result or refusal, the employers need to make sure that the driver has seen a SAP, the driver has completed a return to duty test, a copy of the SAP follow-up is obtained by the employer, and if the driver does not comply with the follow-up plan, knowingly using the driver will result in penalties from the Department of Transportation. And just to reiterate, an employer cannot use an employee to operate a CMV having not completed their return to duty process. It's critical for you to protect yourself in the Department of Transportation to make sure that said employee that you have has completed their return to duty process. Penalties are laid out in Section 49 U.S.C. 521 Part B2, basically just stating that civil penalty will be over $2,500, can't be over $2,500 for each offense. Non-compliant employers may also have their clearinghouse access revoked for frequent violations of reporting, including falsifying testing reports. What's important in this is that if you get your clearinghouse access revoked, you still have to use the clearinghouse. It does not exempt you from having to use it to try to get information in regards to hiring employees as well as looking for information for your own employees. They basically outlined is that you would have to call in to speak to someone to actually query, which sounds like adding a whole lot of extra work on your part. If there's a mistake, drivers do have the right to challenge the information that is on the clearinghouse. They can challenge if something's been reported multiple times, but they can't challenge the actual results. They can have a DUI citation removed because it didn't result in a conviction, and an employer reporting a violation based on actual knowledge. Excuse me. Now, the last two of those are the most important. If you have an employee that gets a DUI citation while driving a commercial motor vehicle, you have to remove them from safety functions, and that's reported, of course, on the clearinghouse. However, if that citation doesn't result in a conviction, it's removed, and that driver is now available for use on safety functions. The other one, an employer reporting violations based on actual knowledge, the FMCSA makes it very clear that if, as an employer, you have actual knowledge of an employee using drugs or alcohol, specifically, they're more looking at alcohol either on the job or an hour before or in between going to a post-accident test. Employers have to keep very detailed notes and keep very detailed information in regards to that actual knowledge. They require documentation and also affidavits from the supervisors who are saying that they have seen it. Employers will receive a notification for drivers queried in the last 30 days. So if, as an employer, you query a driver, the driver comes back with information about having a positive test, and you say, hey, I can't hire you, and the driver says that's a mistake, and they get that removed, you as the employer will be notified that that driver has had that removed. Drivers will also receive notification every time their record has been updated. So, by 2020, employers need to be sure that they get CDL information, including the number of state of origin, is in the driver file and easily accessible for queries. Make changes in hiring information that includes a consent form from drivers to do the initial query and for annual queries, and include the details for which the employer will report results to the clearinghouse. It's also going to be very important to train your designated employer representatives and your safety officers on the required documentation and reporting for actual knowledge of drug and alcohol use while operating a CMV. As a driver, be prepared to use your CDL number when testing instead of your social security number. And employers will require you to give consent whenever they need to run a full query. And it's very important that refusing to give consent will result in not being able to perform safety-sensitive functions for that employer. So the next couple of slides just have some basic questions that I've seen come up in regards to this. The most important one is right on top. This clearinghouse is only for DOT tests. If you have a non-DOT program to go along with your DOT program, and you have an employee who is in your DOT program that tests positive in a non-DOT test, that's not reported to the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse can only have DOT violations. This goes the same thing for if you have an employee that maybe tests positive for a non-DOT test and then moves into functioning as a CMV, that non-DOT test doesn't follow them. In the comments, there were a lot of concerns about HIPAA violations. HIPAA really only affects health plans and healthcare information, which is transmitted electronically, and it's not really a concern for the clearinghouse. If you have a driver that is not going to be operating a CMV, you cannot query the clearinghouse for information about their positive, about information in regards to drug and alcohol testing. The regulations are very clear, and the Congress was very clear in its directions to the FMCSA that this will only govern CMVs. This will only govern vehicles that are governed by 382.103. So if you have a driver, if you're in a situation where you have several trucks, you have some trucks that are over 26K, and you have trucks that are between 10 and 26. You can't use the clearinghouse to hire drivers between 10 and 26,000. You can only use them for 26 plus. Breath alcohol test between 0.02 and 0.39. Even though it's clear in section 49 CFR 382.505A, if you have a driver that tests between 0.02 and 0.39 in a breath alcohol test, you have to pull them from safety functions. It's not, though, a violation under FMCSA rules that requires a return to duty process. So if you have a driver that you get a breath alcohol test and it's, let's say, 0.025, they may not be able to drive for you that day, but that doesn't go into the drug and alcohol testing clearinghouse. But all tests above 0.04 do require that the driver sees a SAP, that it goes through a return to duty process, and that does get reported. If this is a pretty common question as well in regards to multiple employers. There's a question from a lot of the commentators that were larger companies that employed a lot of drivers that said, hey, well, I've got multiple, this guy works for multiple companies. It doesn't matter if an employee is working for different employers, they all have to query him. Again, this is getting at avoiding the situation that I alluded to earlier, where someone tests positive and no one knows. So if you have, as an employer, if you have a driver that's working for 2 or 3 different companies, you still have to query them on a regular, every year. As well, it's something that I think a lot of people don't understand, and it's not made clear here. If you, as an employer, do a pre-employment screen for someone and then they test positive, even if you don't hire them, that result still goes to the clearinghouse. You have a responsibility as an employer to share that information so that other employers know it as well. Questions about jurisdiction under another authority. This is literally only for drivers that are effectively governed by the FMCSA. Any other DOT authority doesn't have access to these records. Is there a time when a negative result needs to be reported to the clearinghouse? No. The only time it's really necessary is for return to duty process, just because it affects the driver's eligibility to perform safety functions. Will non-payment result in cancellation? That answer is no, because the FMCSA has made it clear that you won't be paying a subscription. What you'll be doing is paying every time that you query. So let's say you're querying 10 drivers. You pay for that right then, as opposed to a subscription that maybe you fall back on, you're not paying on a regular basis, and they shut down your access now. It's pay for play. If you need to query drivers, there will be a cost associated with it. And last thing, employers, if they're planning on changing their TPAs, they have to alert the clearinghouse within 10 days. An important section that is not on here is in regards to state licensing. States will have access to the clearinghouse. State driver's license authorities will be also required to query the clearinghouse before they issue or renew a CDL because of a driver's eligibility to perform safety functions. And the new guidelines now state that the SDLA, State Driver's License Authority, should not issue a CDL if they are not eligible. This will be available to all 50 states, including the District of Columbia. Canada and Mexico do not currently have access to the clearinghouse, but it is likely on the horizon because companies that employ drivers from Canada or Mexico operate in the United States. Those drivers are still governed by DOT regulations. And if a driver has a Canadian CDL, it will be included to something that can be queried in the clearinghouse, but it's not clear yet if the permission is going to be granted for Canada and Mexico to have access to the clearinghouse as well. That's about all that I have. So we're going to open it up for some questions, and I'm assuming Kibby has some that you guys have sent.
Exactly. So thanks, Lucas, again for talking on the subject. I know there's a lot of legalese here. At this point, we're moving to the Q&A session. If you have any questions right now, you can write them down in the chat box. We did get one question, and I think there might be a timeline thing with this as well, but the question was, can an employer hire someone who is not in the clearinghouse?
So the regulations on that aren't laid out. This would be my assumption that if you have a driver that's not in the clearinghouse yet because they may have just acquired their CDL, then that should be okay. It'll be a problem if you search their CDL and they said, "Oh, I've had this for years," and nothing comes up. Basically, what you have to understand here is that by searching the clearinghouse with a CDL number, they're only looking to see if there's information there. So if you use the CDL, search the clearinghouse, and this clearinghouse says there's no information on this driver, well, that's a good thing. It means that they didn't test positive, they didn't refuse a test, they're not on a follow-up program, so they're good to hire. Effectively, this tool is less to say that someone is able to perform safety functions and more trying to identify those that aren't able to perform safety functions.
Exactly, and I think even there's the 2020 date of it getting started, but even during the first 3 years, 2020 to 2023, employers will still have to do the background checks going 3 years back, right?
Mm-hmm.
That process as well as following up, and so you sort of have a 3-year process of hopefully this database is getting as many people in there as possible and as quickly as possible so that issue doesn't arise. We did get another question. Would this eliminate the Social Security number altogether?
Essentially, yes. The FMCSA really wants to go away from using Social Security numbers as an identifier for drivers. It's part of federal guidelines that they want to remove the identification, using Social Security numbers as identification government-wide. They really don't like to use it. There's a lot of concerns about safety or security, so they're really trying to move away from it. There was a lot of comments, specifically from the larger companies, commenting on this regulation that asked if they could still be used, and the FMCSA made it very clear they have no intention of Social Security numbers still being used as identifiers. They really are pushing hard to make CDLs the way to identify.
Awesome. Looks like we got one more. Again, if there's more questions, feel free to write them down. Is there a reason why the clearinghouse target date, or why the clearinghouse target date is set for 2020?
Effectively, they want to give the industry the opportunity to start making changes, because this is going to require a whole lot of shifts in terms of what employers are going to need to do. I mean, it's essentially adding a whole nother step. This rule was like the Congress gave this direction to the FMCSA in 2012. So it's been a long time in the making. It went into effect last month, January 4th, 2017 is its effective start date. The other aspect of this as well is this is going to require a lot of collaboration and a lot of integration into technology. The FMCSA doesn't have a website yet. There's still a lot of questions about what's going to be the effective way to identify drivers. This is, as I'm sure everyone is aware, this is an industry that has a lot of people that aren't necessarily technologically savvy. I mean, look at what we're doing with electronic recording. There's been plenty of guys and businesses I've seen that have gone out of business just because they don't want to do that. This will require a driver to have access to the internet, to be able to give permission to a company to get a full query. I mean, it's going to be necessary. They don't explicitly mention it, but the FMCSA is going to encourage drivers that register to put in email addresses so they can be reached that way. There's a explicitly mentioned in here that if they don't have that, then they'll be sending something, register mail, in 2 days. Well, what's going to be the most effective way as a driver for you to be aware of what's happening with your records and what's happening with your information? The employers are looking for that. You're going to want to get an email, an email alert instead of a letter, so that you have a chance to, contact someone contact the employer that put in that information on you, to contact the FMCSA. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here that if we don't get drivers to get on board technologically, that there's going to be some opportunities where drivers are going to lose out on work because they're not able to, give permission for an employer to query. They're not going to be able to know that there may be incorrect or falsified information on their records that they haven't, that they're not able to identify. So this is going to be a long process. I think if the Affordable Health Care Act has shown anything, is that oftentimes building a website that is going to be used by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, is extremely difficult, and it's going to run into some kinks. So they're starting the process now of getting bids from companies to build the website, And I'm sure that, 2019 we'll start to see opportunities to register online. We'll start to see the building of it, and then by 2020, I really think that they're just hoping to hit the ground running with this, and have give employers a really effective tool.
And with that, are there any other questions from the audience? Awesome. So before we wrap up, I do want to thank again Lukas for taking the time to chat with us. So thank you, Lukas. So reasonable suspicion is required for DOT and highly valuable for companies not federally regulated. So when was the last time your managers of CDL drivers have gone through reasonable suspicion training? This training that we provide at Clean Fleet can be an online video or a live webinar. If you're interested and want to learn more, you can go to cleanfleet.org/workforce reasonable suspicion training. Again, these slides will be provided to you at the end. And lastly, we have some future monthly webinars coming up. In March, next month, we have a webinar on the cost of marijuana in the workplace. We just published an ebook on the effects of marijuana in Oregon and Washington, and so that's going to be part of the lead up, but how it's affecting the workplace businesses, whether they're federally regulated or not. So it's an interesting webinar to join in on. Also on April 20th, we have a webinar on what is oral saliva testing and why should I care. This is also important for DOT companies, trucking companies, because oral saliva is going to be coming down the road. And so it's something to be aware of and keep on your radar. If you want to register, you can go to cleanfleet.org/monthly webinar, and I'll have the April one up there live by the end of the day, so you can register for that. So with that, I'd like to conclude this webinar. Thank you for everyone attending, and again, thank you, Lukas, for the presentation, and have a great day.